The story begins with a person whose life looked normal from the outside, but inside everything was starting to fall apart. They woke up every morning before sunrise, not because they wanted to, but because their mind refused to let them sleep. Thoughts ran in circles, reminding them of unfinished tasks. Bills waiting on the table, responsibilities piling up like weight on their shoulders. And people who expected something from them every single day, they sat on the side of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to remember when life last felt peaceful. It had been years. They once laughed easily, slept without worry, and enjoyed simple moments. But those memories now felt far away, like another lifetime. Now, they felt tired even before the day began. Their routine was the same every day. Wake up early. Drink tea or coffee to stay awake. Rush into work. Smile even when they didn't feel like smiling. Answer messages. Reply to emails. Sit in long meetings. Carry stress, and pretend everything was okay. People around them thought they were strong and calm, but deep inside, they felt like a thin thread close to breaking. Every morning before leaving home, they looked in the mirror and noticed the small changes in their face. Dark circles under their eyes. A dull expression. Shoulders slightly bent, as if carrying invisible weight. They whispered to themselves, "Just make it through the day," and left the house. On the bus or in their car, the world felt loud. Horns, traffic, voices, engines, alarms, phones ringing, all sounds merging into a huge cloud of noise. Even silence hurt because silence brought thinking. Thinking brought stress. When they reached the workplace, the building itself felt heavy. Bright white lights, the smell of paper, keyboards clicking non-stop. Telephones ringing, footsteps moving fast. And people speaking loudly created a space where peace did not exist. Work was not the problem by itself. The real problem was pressure. Deadlines were always close. Tasks were never finished. New responsibilities kept coming. And no matter how hard they worked, there was always someone saying, "You should do more." Their coworkers sometimes joked about the stress, laughing about how tired they were. But not this person. They didn't joke because stress no longer felt funny. It felt dangerous. Their chest hurt sometimes. Their breathing became shallow. Their heart beat faster for no reason. They couldn't focus. They forgot small things like where they kept their keys or whether they locked the door. At lunchtime, while others laughed or chatted, this person sat quietly, staring at their food without eating much. Their appetite had changed. Some days they ate too much. Some days nothing at all. Coworkers asked, "Are you okay?" And the answer was always the same. Yes, just a little tired. But the truth was much deeper. They were not a little tired. They were exhausted in the soul. Going home after work did not bring relief either. The moment they stepped into their house, new stress waited. Dishes in the sink. Laundry not done. Messages to reply to. Family members expecting help, conversation, or emotional support. Everyone needed something. Nobody noticed that the person giving help was slowly breaking inside. Sometimes they sat alone in the living room late at night, staring at the wall. They didn't want to watch TV or scroll their phone. They simply wanted a calm space inside their head. But the mind refused to be quiet. It reminded them of past mistakes, future fears, unpaid bills, unfinished plans, and people they might disappoint. Their breathing felt heavy. Their eyes burned. Their stomach twisted from anxiety. They tried different things to stop the stress. They read articles about exercise. They walked around the block in the evening, but instead of relaxing, they kept thinking about tomorrow's problems. They tried deep breathing exercises. But every time they inhaled deeply, thoughts interrupted. They tried drinking warm tea before bed, hoping sleep would come easily, but sleep came only in short pieces. Some nights they cried silently, feeling confused about why their life had turned into such a painful routine. On weekends, instead of resting, they planned to clean, fix, prepare the house. Instead of relaxing, they spent hours worrying about upcoming weeks. It wasn't just work or home life causing trouble. Social pressure also played its role. People on social media posted perfect pictures full of smiles, holidays, success, love, and joy. This person saw those pictures and wondered, why can't I feel that way? Why am I stuck in this never-ending stress? Their mind compared everything. It compared their life to others, their achievements to others, their happiness to others. Slowly, their self-confidence began to fall apart. They questioned their worth. Am I good enough? Why do I feel so weak? Why can't I be happy? What happened to me? These silent questions lived in their heart every day. They didn't share these thoughts with anyone. They were afraid people would not understand. They were afraid people would say, "It's only stress, just relax," because to them, the stress felt much bigger than that. It felt like a storm inside their chest. A storm that never rested. One evening, the day had been especially long. Work had been busy, a family argument happened, and a headache followed them home. They sat on the couch, rubbed their temples, and felt a deep emptiness. They opened their phone to distract the mind. They scrolled through random videos, not really watching, just using their phone to avoid thinking. Then something unusual happened. A video thumbnail appeared with a peaceful painting and a title about calming classical music. It did not look interesting at first glance. They almost scrolled past it. But something in the image of river, mountains, soft colors, gave them a strange feeling. They tapped the video. Soft piano notes filled the air. Not too loud, not too fast, not too sharp, just gentle. The sound wrapped around them like warm air on a cold night. Their breathing slowed, their chest relaxed, their shoulders dropped. They leaned back into the couch, surprised by the feeling. The room felt less heavy. The walls seemed wider. The silence around the notes felt comforting instead of frightening. They closed their eyes for a moment, with the piano. A violin joined softly, then faded away, then returned again. It felt like someone was talking to their soul without using words. Tears formed in their eyes, not from sadness, but from relief for the first time in many months. Their minds stopped running. No bills, no no noise, just music. The sound carried memories of childhood, running in open fields. Sunshine on skin, laughter around dinner tables, but more than memories, the music carried peace. They listened for an hour without noticing time passing. When the music stopped, they opened their eyes slowly and looked around. The room looked the same, but something inside them felt different. Something small, but important. A light feeling, like a tiny door had opened after being locked for too long. They whispered to themselves, "Why does this feel so good?" They pressed replay again. Peace returned. The music did something they did not expect. It worked without effort. Without trying, without pushing, without studying, without thinking, it simply happened. For the first time in years, they felt calm. Not completely healed, not fully happy, not free of problems, but calm enough to breathe deeply without pain. The next day, they woke up tired as usual, but something inside remembered the music. Before breakfast, they played it again. The soft melody filled the kitchen. They closed their eyes and listened. Their hearts slowed, their shoulders relaxed. The morning felt easier throughout the day. Stress still came, but it did not control them the same way. Whenever pressure started building, music returned to their thoughts. They found themselves humming small parts of the tune. It felt like the beginning of something new, something hopeful, something peaceful. They didn't tell anyone yet. They kept the discovery private, like a small treasure they weren't ready to share. That night, again, they listened before sleep, and something beautiful happened. They slept longer than usual. The next morning, they woke up surprised. Their mind felt slightly clearer. Not perfect, not magical, but different. For many years, they searched for solutions outside themselves. They tried routines, health tips, self-help articles, but nothing brought peace. Now, classical music entered their world quietly. Without force, they did not know where the journey would lead, or how much it would change their life. But at that moment, sitting in their living room with soft music playing, they finally felt a small spark of hope after a long time of darkness. and that was enough to keep listening again tomorrow. This was only the first step, the beginning of their healing. The beginning of learning how simple sounds could calm the storm that life had created inside them. They didn't know yet that classical music would soon become more than a hobby. It would become a lifeline. And what started as a random click on a calm video would slowly turn into a path toward peace they never believed they deserved. They didn't know the future, but they felt something new, a quiet message saying, "You are not alone. You can heal." And with that gentle whisper inside the music, their life began to change, one calm breath at a time. After that first evening, something inside them had shifted. The music they had listened to was still echoing in their mind. Even during work, small fragments of soft piano notes seemed to linger in the corners of their thoughts. At first it was strange. They had never considered music as a form of comfort in a serious way. Music was background noise, something people enjoyed casually. Maybe something to hum along to, but never something that could change how a person felt inside. And yet, the gentle sounds they had discovered did exactly that. The next day, found themselves opening the same video before starting breakfast. The familiar notes floated across the kitchen, soft and unassuming, but powerful in the effect they had. The person took a deep breath, feeling the tension in their shoulders slowly loosen. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. Their mind, which always seemed to jump from one thought to another, felt slightly calmer. Even the usual morning worry about unfinished tasks seemed less urgent. As the day went on, they realized how much of their life had been consumed by tension. Everything: work, chores, obligations, even casual conversations had been touched by stress. But for the first time, they noticed how different things could feel. The music did not erase the problems, but it gave them space. It a small pocket of peace where they could breathe without guilt or fear. They began experimenting. Sometimes they played the music while working, keeping it low in the background. At first, they worried it might be a distraction. But as hours passed, they discovered something remarkable. Their focus improved. Tasks that usually felt overwhelming now seemed more manageable. The rhythm of the notes seemed to guide their mind, creating a steady, calm flow. Emails were answered more quickly, reports were finished with less strain, and even conversations with colleagues felt less tense. The person realized that something simple, just listening, was affecting the way they thought, the way they moved, the way they felt. They had spent so long believing that relief required effort, meditation, therapy, complicated routines. But here was a quiet melody that was working naturally, gently, without any pressure to perform or achieve. It reminded them that healing did not always need to be forceful. Sometimes it was about creating space for the soul to breathe. By the evening, they were eager to return home. The day had been difficult in its usual ways, but the music had helped them carry it differently. They did not rush in. They lingered at the door for a moment, just breathing, feeling the quiet in their apartment. Once inside, they turned on another piece, letting the sound fill every corner. This time, they sat on the floor, legs crossed, hands resting on their knees. They closed their eyes and listened with full attention. It was not just the notes that moved them. It was the feeling behind the music. The gentle rise and fall of each melody reminded them of long-forgotten moments of safety. Memories of being cared for as a child came up, soft laughter in the kitchen, a warm blanket on a cold evening, the simple joy of someone noticing them without judgment. These small, ordinary experiences had been buried under years of stress, but music had a way of unlocking them. Tears came again, silently, without shame or self-consciousness. This time, they welcomed them. Tears were no longer a sign of weakness, but of connection to themselves, to feelings they had ignored, to a part of life that was soft and unhurried. Over the next few days, they continued this quiet ritual. Music became a companion, a friend who required nothing and gave everything. Sometimes, they would sit in silence after listening, feeling the echoes of the melody still humming in their chest. They noticed that they could think more clearly about their problems. Things that had seemed impossible during the week suddenly appeared solvable. The overwhelming weight of responsibility had not disappeared, but it had shifted. It no longer crushed them completely. It simply existed as a manageable part of life. They also began to notice changes in their body. Their shoulders were no longer tight in the evenings. The constant tension in their jaw had eased. Their stomach, which had often twisted in anxiety, was calmer. Even their sleep was slowly improving. The nights were still not perfect, but they were longer, less interrupted by worry or racing thoughts at work. Colleagues began noticing subtle differences. The person was still serious and focused, but there was a gentleness in their expression. The usual impatience had softened. When a difficult situation arose, instead of panicking or reacting sharply, they responded with more thoughtfulness. Some coworkers mentioned it casually. "You seem calmer these days." They smiled quietly, saying nothing about the music because this was something personal, a secret that felt too intimate to share just yet. One evening, as they listened to a piece by Chopin, they realized how much the music allowed them to connect with their emotions. For so long, they had ignored or suppressed feelings because they were inconvenient, painful, or difficult to handle. But here, with soft notes filling the room, emotions came naturally. Sadness could exist without being overwhelming. Joy could appear quietly, without demanding loud celebration. Grief could be felt and released, without shame. Music created a space where feelings could exist in their own form, without judgment. They began to explore more. Different pieces, different composers, different instruments. Sometimes it was a gentle piano. Sometimes it was a violin that seemed to cry softly. Sometimes it was a mix, each note carefully placed like a word in a letter written for the soul. They started noticing patterns in how different types of music affected them. Some pieces helped them focus, some made them reflect, and some simply soothed their mind when it was overworked. The person started keeping a small journal, writing down thoughts and feelings after listening. They did not share these writings with anyone. It was not about performance or proof. It was about noticing, documenting, and appreciating small changes. Sometimes they wrote about how a single note had made them remember something long forgotten. Sometimes they wrote about the calm that allowed them to solve a problem they had been worrying about for days. One day, after a particularly challenging morning at work, they felt the urge to play a long piece by Beethoven. The first notes hit, and a warmth spread through them. Stress, which had built up throughout the day, began to melt. They closed their eyes and listened fully, noticing every shift in tempo, every swell of sound. The music carried them through the tension, like a gentle river carrying debris away, leaving smooth stones behind. That evening, they reflected on how strange it was that something so simple could create such a profound effect. They thought about the years they had spent searching for relief in complicated methods, expensive programs, or endless advice. And yet, here was something freely available, ancient yet timeless, simple yet transformative. They realized that part of the power of music was in its constancy. Unlike the unpredictable events of life, the music remained the same. Each note was a promise, a rhythm they could rely on. This constancy offered a sense of safety. The world outside could be chaotic, unpredictable, stressful, but within the notes, there was order, balance, and harmony. The person began to notice subtle shifts in their relationships. Family members seemed calmer around them. Conversations with friends were less rushed and more meaningful. They found themselves listening more, smiling more, and speaking with less urgency. It was as if the calm they cultivated internally began radiating outward, touching the world around them. They also noticed a change in how they perceived challenges. Difficult tasks no longer felt like insurmountable mountains. Instead, they felt like problems to be addressed thoughtfully, step by step. Music had taught them patience, not directly, but through example. Each note unfolded in its own time. Each melody required listening and attention. Life, too, could unfold without force or panic. Sometimes during these quiet evenings, they allowed themselves to dream. They imagined a life where stress did not dominate, a life where problems existed but did not consume, a life where simple pleasures, small joys, and quiet moments had value equal to achievement and productivity. These dreams were no longer just fantasies. They felt like possible realities. glimpses of what could be nurtured over time, even when stress returned. As it inevitably did, the person had learned a new approach. Instead of letting worry take over, they would press play. The music became a bridge from tension to peace, from chaos to clarity. It reminded them that relief was possible, even in the middle of the storm. One night, after weeks of daily listening, they had a profound realization. They had spent so long believing that calm was something external, something to be found in holidays, new jobs, or different circumstances. But here within themselves, through the guidance of music, they were discovering that calm could be cultivated. Peace was not something to chase, it was something to allow, to create, to return to. This understanding shifted their mindset. Problems did not disappear, but the weight of them lessened. Life was still challenging, still unpredictable, still full of responsibilities, but they now had tools to navigate it with resilience. Music had taught them that inner peace was not about avoiding stress, it was about finding a center amidst it. They continued exploring, learning, and listening. Each day brought new discoveries. Sometimes a simple melody could make them cry. Sometimes it made them smile. Sometimes it allowed them to sit in quiet reflection and just breathe. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, their life began to change. The person was not yet fully healed. They still had hard days, still felt anxiety at times, and still faced responsibilities that demanded their attention. But they had found a source of comfort that was always available, always reliable, always gentle. Classical music had become more than sound. It had become a companion, a teacher, and a healer. They began to look forward to each evening, each moment of listening not as an escape, but as a return to themselves, to peace, and to the simple beauty that had long been missing from their life. This was the start of a journey. One note at a time, one day at a time, learning to breathe again, to feel again, and to live again. And in that gentle rhythm, they discovered the beginning of hope. The next phase of their journey began quietly, almost unnoticed, but its effects were profound. After weeks of experimenting with different pieces of classical music, they realized that listening was no longer just an occasional relief, was becoming essential. They started noticing that even a few minutes of soft piano or gentle strings could shift the atmosphere inside their mind, like clouds breaking apart to reveal sunlight one morning. They woke up feeling more aware of how much they had changed. The usual tension in their body was not gone completely, but it was lighter. They could breathe deeper, stretch more easily, and walk without feeling weighed down. It was subtle, yet undeniable. The person realized that the music had begun to rewire their habits. Slowly but steadily, they started incorporating music into their daily routine. Breakfast was no longer eaten in silence or with the hum of the TV in the background. Instead, they played calming compositions, letting the melodies guide their thoughts gently into the day. Each note seemed to carry intention. The act of listening became a ritual way of preparing themselves for what lay ahead. Even during the commute to work, music accompanied them. Whether walking, driving, or riding public transport, the melodies became a shield against the chaos outside. The honking cars, the shouting voices, the crowds, all faded into the background. They noticed that when music was present, the world seemed less harsh, their mind less prone to spiraling into worry. At work, they began to experiment further. Whenever stress mounted, instead of responding with irritation or tension, they would play a piece quietly in their headphones. It was amazing how quickly the music could change their state. Meetings that would have felt overwhelming became manageable. Tasks that seemed tedious could be approached with a sense of focus and patience. Even when colleagues expressed frustration or deadlines tightened, they felt a new ability to handle the pressure calmly. One afternoon, a particularly difficult situation arose. A critical project faced unexpected setbacks, and everyone in the office grew tense. Usually this would have caused them panic, short temper, or headaches. But this time, they simply closed their eyes for a moment, pressed play on their headphones, and let the music guide them. The gentle piano notes allowed their mind to clear, and suddenly, solutions appeared more clearly. They were able to suggest ideas, remain composed, and help the team navigate the problem. Colleagues noticed the change and remarked on their calm demeanor. The person smiled quietly, realizing that the music was no longer just for private comfort, it was becoming a tool for resilience. Back home, ritual continued. Evenings became sacred, a time to reconnect with the self that had been buried under years of stress. They would choose different pieces each night, sometimes long sonatas, sometimes short compositions, exploring how different melodies affected mood and thought. Some music brought reflection, some brought energy, some simply allowed them to sit in quiet peace. During these moments, they began to notice deeper changes in their emotions. Feelings that had once been overwhelming sadness, anxiety, anger, could now be observed without judgment. They could acknowledge a worry or a frustration and then gently release it into the music. It was as if the notes carried the weight away, leaving clarity and calm behind. They also began to pay more attention to the world around them. The colors of the evening sky, the sound of wind against the window, the small movements of household pets all became more vivid. Life, which had once been a blur of stress and obligation, was slowly revealing its beauty again. Music had taught them not only to listen to melodies, but to listen to life itself. Sleep continued to improve. Before, nights had been filled with tossing, turning, and anxious thoughts. Now, playing classical music before bed helped them transition from the chaos of the day into rest. They no longer feared the night. They welcomed it as a time for renewal. Dreams became more pleasant, and waking up was less of a struggle. The body and mind, which had carried tension for so long, were beginning to feel restored. Even personal relationships began to improve. Friends and family noticed a subtle change in their energy. Conversations were less hurried, laughter more genuine, patience more apparent. The person realized that by finding calm within themselves, they could extend that calm to others. Music had become not only a source of healing, but a bridge to connection. One morning, they realized they had started to anticipate stress in a new way. Instead of feeling fear at the thought of upcoming challenges, they felt curiosity and preparedness. Music had given them a framework for coping. Whenever anxiety threatened, they instinctively thought of a melody, a rhythm, a note, and allowed it to anchor them. The mind, once a battlefield of relentless worries, now had a sanctuary. They also became more reflective. Music encouraged moments of introspection, allowing them to ask important questions. What really mattered? What could be let go of? Which habits served their well-being, and which drained it? They began to make subtle changes, organizing tasks in a more manageable way, setting aside small periods for rest, being mindful of what they consumed both physically and mentally. Life had not changed dramatically in circumstances, but the approach to it had transformed. The person began to explore the stories behind the music. They learned about composers in their lives, the struggles and triumphs that shaped the pieces they loved. There was something inspiring in knowing that human beings, across centuries, had expressed the same emotions they felt through music. Pain, joy, hope, and despair could all be heard in the notes. This knowledge deepened the connection they felt with each composition, making listening an act not just of relaxation but of empathy and understanding. Friends eventually noticed the growing habit and commented on it. Some were curious, others skeptical. The person explained simply, "It helps me think, breathe, and feel better. It's calming." There was no need to exaggerate or convince anyone. The results were visible. Calmness, focus, and a quiet confidence had become part of their presence. On weekends, they sometimes visited quiet spaces to listen without distractions: a park, a library, or even a secluded room in their home. Sitting in silence with music allowed a deeper immersion. They noticed details in compositions that had been missed before: a subtle shift in tempo, a delicate pause, a gentle layering of instruments. Each moment of attention was like discovering a new part of the self. Long forgotten, the person also began to notice the connection between music and physical sensations. A slow, soothing melody could lower their heart rate, release tension from their shoulders, and ease tightness in their chest. Faster, more uplifting compositions could energize them, providing motivation for tasks or workouts. The awareness of the body-mind connection became clearer. Music was no longer entertainment. It was a guide, a teacher, and a healer. One day, after a particularly stressful morning, they realized something remarkable. A problem that would have previously triggered hours of anxiety was now approached calmly. They listened to a short composition on the way to work, and instead of reacting impulsively, they evaluated the situation thoughtfully. Solutions came naturally, without panic, without fear. It was as if music had trained their mind to respond with balance rather than chaos. The transformation extended into creativity as well. The person found themselves drawing, writing, or simply thinking more freely. Ideas flowed in a gentler, more organized way. They no longer felt mentally blocked or exhausted. Music had unlocked a part of their mind that had been dormant, teaching them that peace allowed creativity to flourish. At home, evenings became sacred once more. They would sometimes light a candle, sit in a comfortable chair, and let music fill the space. It was a time to reconnect, to reflect, and to simply exist without judgment. The stress of the day was acknowledged but not clung to. The notes seemed to carry it away, leaving only presence and awareness. Gradually, they noticed a pattern. Stress no longer dominated life as it once had. Challenges still existed, but they were approached with patience. Fear was replaced with preparedness. Panic was replaced with perspective. Music had given them a way to navigate life, to remain grounded amidst chaos. Even small things, like preparing meals or cleaning the house, became more mindful. They began to take pleasure in the ordinary. A warm cup of tea, sunlight streaming through the window. A gentle breeze outside, these moments were now noticed, appreciated, and savored. Life, once dominated by tension, was slowly opening up to moments of joy. The person realized that healing was not instantaneous. It was a gradual process, like learning a language or growing a garden. Music was the constant companion guiding each step. And every day, with each note, a small transformation took place. The body relaxed, the mind cleared, and the soul felt a little lighter. They no longer sought happiness in external achievements alone. Instead, they discovered that peace could be cultivated internally, nurtured with patience, attention, and care. Music had become the anchor, and they began to feel secure in a way that had been impossible before. One evening, as a long symphony played softly in the background, they reflected on the journey so far. Life had not become perfect. Problems, stress, and responsibilities were still present, but the relationship with these challenges had changed. Instead of being overwhelmed, they now faced life with resilience, awareness, and quiet strength. Music had taught them the value of presence, the power of attention, and the possibility of peace, even in the midst of chaos. It was during these reflections that they understood the depth of the transformation. Classical music had begun as a small escape, a temporary comfort. But over weeks and months, it had grown into a daily practice, a source of therapy, and a foundation for a new way of living. They realized that stress, while still a part of life, no longer had the power to control them. They had discovered a tool, a lifeline, and a friend. Music had not removed the storms, but it had given them a compass to navigate through them. And in that realization, they felt something they had not felt in years. Hope. Hope that life could be gentle. Hope that they could manage challenges with calm. Hope that small, simple practices could create lasting change. And with that hope, they pressed play on another composition, letting the notes carry them forward, one gentle melody at a time. Life, as it always does, had a way of testing the lessons we think we've learned. For weeks, months even, the person had felt calmer, more grounded, and better able to handle life's usual pressures. But one morning, something happened that shook them more than they had been shaken in years. It began as an ordinary day. They woke up early, went through the familiar morning routine, and started the day with the comforting sound of a soft piano piece. They felt ready, calm, and prepared to face whatever work or life would throw at them. But just as they were heading out, A phone call arrived that changed everything. The voice on the other end was strained, urgent. Someone close to them had been in an accident. They had been hurt, not critically, but badly enough to require immediate attention and care. The news hit them like a wave. Their stomach twisted, their heart raced, and for the first time in months, panic threatened to take hold. Everything that had felt stable, everything they had built with weeks of care and attention, suddenly seemed fragile. They wanted to scream, to cry, to shake the world for being so unfair. But there was no time for long emotional breakdowns. They had to act. They had to leave the house, drive, communicate, make arrangements. All while feeling the old storm rising inside, they started the car with shaking hands. Their mind was spinning, imagining the worst, replaying scenarios, calculating outcomes. Tears blurred their vision, and yet they pressed on, because there was no other choice. This was real life, and there was no pause button. As they drove, the weight of panic grew heavier. Their breathing became shallow. Their chest felt tight. Thoughts collided in a chaotic storm. What if it's worse than they say? Did I do enough to prepare for emergencies? How could this happen? I can't handle this. It was then, in the midst of the panic, that they remembered the music. A small, quiet thought surfaced. Play the music. Let it guide you. At first, it seemed almost impossible. How could soft classical music make a difference when life was demanding every ounce of focus and strength? Yet, they reached for their phone, pressed play, and let the gentle melody fill the small space of their car. Almost immediately, something shifted. The chaotic racing of thoughts slowed just a fraction. The tightness in their chest eased slightly. The notes were not a cure, but they were a lifeline or reminder that even in the middle of fear, there was a way to anchor oneself. With music playing softly, they focused on the rhythm. Inhale, exhale, one note. Then another. Each melody became a small step toward clarity. They could not control what had happened, but they could control how they met it. At the hospital, the situation was tense. Doctors and nurses moved quickly. The person stayed close, listening carefully, following instructions, helping where they could, while the music continued quietly in their mind. Even in the chaos, they discovered that their calm presence helped the injured person stay less anxious, more reassured. Calm was contagious. Hours passed like this. Decisions needed to be made. What treatments to approve, which arrangements to coordinate, how to manage work and family obligations simultaneously. Normally, this level of stress would have been overwhelming, leaving them paralyzed. But the training of weeks of daily immersion in music and mindful reflection gave them tools to navigate. They noticed something remarkable. Even when fear and worry tried to dominate, the memory of the melodies anchored them. They could think clearly, speak calmly, and act decisively. Music was not magic. It did not remove the danger or the responsibility, but it provided a framework, a steadying presence that allowed them to respond rather than react. During brief moments alone, they would take deep breaths and mentally replay the compositions that had become so central to their daily life. A soft piano piece, a gentle violin, flowing orchestral movement, they imagined the notes, the rise and fall, the quiet pauses between. With each imagined note, tension left their body, even if only slightly. By the evening, the immediate crisis was under control. The person they cared for was stable, surrounded by competent medical staff, and beginning recovery. The sense of relief was immense, but not complete. Exhaustion hit them hard. Hours of emotional strain, combined with the constant mental alertness, left them physically drained. Back home, they turned on the music for real, not imagined. Sitting on the floor, letting the sound wash over them, they finally allowed themselves to release the accumulated tension. Tears flowed freely not just from fear or worry, but from gratitude, from relief, and from the recognition of their own resilience. The person reflected on how different the situation had been compared to similar crises in the past. Years ago, they might have felt completely overwhelmed, paralyzed by panic, unable to think clearly. But now, even under intense pressure, they had been able to act with composure, make rational decisions, and provide support for someone else in need. Music had trained them for this, not in a conventional sense, but by teaching patience, presence, and emotional awareness. They realized that stress would always exist in life. Emergencies, unexpected events, challenges beyond one's control, these were inevitable. But they also realized that the way we meet these challenges can change. Tools, practices, and habits cultivated over time can make a difference between chaos and composure. Despair and hope, the following days were full of recovery efforts. Medical visits, phone calls, insurance paperwork, adjusting schedules, all the normal pressures returned. Yet there was a difference this time. The person found that they could navigate these responsibilities without being consumed by them. Music remained a constant companion, playing in the background or quietly humming in their mind. Offering reassurance, perspective, and calm, they began to notice subtle shifts in themselves. Their patience with others increased. Conversations, even difficult ones, were met with a sense of measured understanding rather than irritation or defensiveness. Decisions that once would have felt stressful now felt manageable. They were still human, still feeling fear, frustration, fatigued, but there was now a buffer, space in which they could operate with clarity. The experience also strengthened their empathy. Having faced intense stress without being completely undone, they realized the power of calm in helping others. They offered reassurance to friends, family, and colleagues in ways they had never done before. The music had not only helped them internally, it had equipped them to be a source of steadiness for others. One quiet evening, after weeks of constant care and attention, they sat alone, reflecting. The memory of the crisis was still vivid, but the terror that might have accompanied it was muted. Instead, they felt gratitude for the resilience they discovered, for the presence of music in their life, for the ability to act effectively under pressure.